Welcome everyone to our online impact event, contact tracing app, data taking control over COVID-19 with Associate Professor Muthu Kumarasamy, or Muthu, from our Institute for Integrated and Intelligent Systems. Before we get started, even though this is a virtual event, Griffith University acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are attending this meeting and pays respects to the elders past and present, and extends that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. My name is Damien Harris. I'm the Engagement Manager for the Sciences Group at Griffith University, and I'll be guiding us through today's event. Muthu is a cybersecurity researcher for our Institute for Integrated and Intelligent Systems and teaches numerous courses in the School of Information and Communication Technologies. Shortly, Muthu will be giving his presentation. During this time, I encourage you to ask questions through our question and answer service. That'll be on the side of your screen, but we won't be answering those questions till the end of the presentation, but you can ask them at any time through the presentation. I also encourage you to use the thumbs up on the Q&A panel to give an indication of which questions you find most important, so we can get to those ones first. We probably won't have time for all the questions, but we certainly want to know which ones are valuable to you. I will now hand over to Muthu to present Contact Tracing App, data taking control over COVID-19.
Thank you, Damien. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this presentation. I'm going to discuss briefly about the Contact Tracing app. Before that, I will acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today and pay my respect to the elders of the past and the present. Yes, as Damien said, this topic seems to be very popular at the moment because the automatic contact tracing has become an urgent intervention needed to mitigate the spread of the virus. So the topics I'm going to touch today is about the technology, how technology can become an enabler, and what the world has attempted on this space. In particular, the COVID Safe app in Australia, how is it and how it functions. Then briefly the security and privacy issues associated with the contact tracing app. Then I will be discussing the future directions along this. As you all know, Australia hasn't just flattened the curve, it has crushed it. Thank you, well done. The challenge is what's next? As we relax the restrictions, is it going to flare up? What mechanisms we have got in place to control any event? So far we have done very well. Different countries around the world have adopted different paths as an end game. Some countries went down the path of vaccine and then rebatching it. Some countries tested initially herd immunity, where they can be in front in the economic recovery, and Australia decided to go in the suppression path. In that, the testing is critical, and then those who got tested positive needs to be isolated. The contact tracing needs to happen. Who are the people they were in touch with, and to quarantine them. This cycle continues. If this ring is very effective, the coronavirus can be trapped inside. The weakest link in this ring is the contact tracing. The point is how effectively we could do it, how quickly we could do it, how much data we can gather. That's the question. What we use at the moment is the conventional, traditional contact tracing. That, as you all know, it's an officer asking questions from an infected person. Where were you and who are the people you met? When did you meet them? Can we get the context of them? Then trying to call them, go from there. This requires armies of people. It's a labor intensive, and the outcome is as good as someone's memory. Also, it can have number of errors in that process. So we were thinking, hey, can we use technology in this era? We use it for everything. And can we collect data using that technology? This data may be useful to reduce the reproduction number R0 and maybe a miracle recovery for Australia and the world. And these collected data may become a valuable tool for the epidemiologist. App simply complements the efforts of the health officials. And one main advantage of the app is it's scalable, less resource intensive. You know how much effort and resources we are putting in at the moment. However, it comes with a cost. It poses different levels of security and privacy risk for individuals as well as for societies. There are already concerns raised around the social stigma, the domestic violence issues. Technology is nothing new. We are immersed in the technology every day, every time. So is it really raising a privacy issue? Are we concerned about using Facebook or Google or Amazon or the online tools, the apps, mobile phone, electronic transactions, or any other social media? If we are not concerned, then our bar is pretty high, because if I can tell some data to put it in perspective, there was a study done recently, not recently, a few years ago, and they found that if we get 4 data points, someone was in a location and the time. 4 such data points is good enough to uniquely identify somebody with 95% accuracy. That's a bit scary. So the contact tracing app uses Bluetooth. Let's look at Bluetooth technology. Bluetooth is not new to us. Again, we use it daily in our sports fitness devices, healthcare sensors, blood pressure, heart rate monitoring, continuous glucose monitoring, smart watches, etc. They use Bluetooth. So we are not foreign to Bluetooth either. Let's look at, to get the proper picture about the app and how it operates, what are the implications of that for us as individual and as a society, and what's the benefit to the mankind. Let's look at some of the fundamentals. The Bluetooth is a radio wave. It cannot measure distance. There's a lot of myth out there. It can measure 1.5 meter, etc. No, it cannot measure distance. It works on the received signal strength. The phone gets a measure, RSSI, that may be used to estimate the distance. What happens? The phone periodically broadcast anonymized ID, not the real ID, but anonymized ID. And that keeps changing so that people will not be able to track. Then at the same time, phone stores any received anonymized IDs as well, with the corresponding signal strength and the timestamp. The device, this approach is a device-centric or people-centric rather than location-centric. That's important because this app doesn't record the location. What has the world done using technology to take control of the COVID-19? One of the leading countries in that was China, the first country. they used extensively the mobile phone location, QR code, that is if someone is accessing a building, they need to scan that, then color code it. It's a digital surveillance. It was a bit harsh, but they successfully managed to contain it. Another country is Taiwan, did very well in terms of coronavirus, but they use a slightly different technique. They use big data analytics. They took the health data set, the insurance, travel data, GPS. It's a digital surveillance game. South Korea, another country, relatively successful. They used a different technique. They used electronic transaction data, CCTV data, mobile phone location, and they were informing the public where the hotspots are and what type of person who is infected as well. So that raised lots of debate about the privacy. They used electronic fencing technique. Example, India, they use Bluetooth with GPS. That's a tracking, and they want the public servants and the private employees to use this. Another country, Israel, they use mobile phone with location tracking. Again, that was highly criticized for privacy reasons, and it was challenged in the courts, and they are changing their approach now. Coming back, Singapore used Bluetooth without any location data. And that was one of the very first countries to use Bluetooth only and put the code out for anyone to use it, open source. Australia, Australian app is based on the Singapore model, and the UK is very similar to that. They are using Bluetooth. If we look at different approaches for this contact tracing app, we could categorize them into centralized or decentralized. Most of the app that we discussed so far falls under centralized. So there is a new thinking to take it towards decentralized model, because that may provide better privacy. The source code can be open or is closed. Then it may use Bluetooth and GPS or Bluetooth only. The architecture, the underlying architecture and the protocols used in each of the app may be different. Let's look at the centralized protocol. That's the one popular used so far. It basically register. Initially, you need to register with the central authority, normally the government or the health department. Then you take the phone and do the normal business. It does the proximity tracing. Once it's someone is found to be infected, then the person uploads all they had to a server. Then the server, they have the details of all the registered users. They alert the people who were in proximity, who were exposed to the infected people. This is the Blue Trace. That's the protocol used in the Singaporean app, and similar version, slightly different, the Pan-European group also came up with. In this, what we need to remember is the temporary ID is generated by the central server, and matching whether someone is exposed or not is also done in the central server. The other side of the story is a decentralized protocol. A group of researchers came up with this. It's a breakaway group, for example, from the Pan-European group, DP3T group. They said, we are mindful of the privacy. We need to come up with a better mechanism. In this case, there's no setup required. You don't need to register initially with the central authority, and you simply download the app, and the temporary IDs in this case are generated within the individual phones. And the matching they proposed also to be done in the individual's phone, not in the central server. So not uploading a lot of personal detail to the state machineries. That's why they want to go for the decentralized protocol. server doesn't have access to the full set of contact list. Health authority only tests the patient and confirm whether they are infected or not. And Apple, Google, they formed alliance to combat this COVID-19. That's very surprising. They never come together, but late March, the CEOs of Apple and Google got together and they said they will come up with a common API so that world around can use it easily for the contact tracing. Now look at the COVID Safe. That app is based on the Singaporean Trace Together app. The Trace Together uses the Blue Trace protocol. Examine the Blue Trace protocol. On the right side here, you see the diagram which shows the client, which is say user, me, and the client peripheral. That's the other user who is exposed. Then in between, you see the reporting server. That's a central server. Initially, the device to reporting server communication, DRSC, fetches the temporary IDs from the server and gets to the phone. And the second phase, DDC, the device to device communication, where the handshake, digital handshake happens. The temporary IDs, if they are in the proximity within the Bluetooth range, they exchange and store that. Then the last phase is, again, if someone is infected, they upload this handshake data to the central server. To do that, they need to get a PIN from the server. That is to prevent false positive and false negative getting into the server. If you see on the right side diagram, the format of the temporary ID, how they generate this temporary ID as per the Blue Trace protocol is they use the user ID, which is normally a phone number, a start time, expiry time, that depends on at what time they are starting, and an IV, that's an initialization vector to randomize a whole lot, and authentication tag. This is put through a couple of crypto algorithms, fairly strong, and they get a temporary ID. In this Trace Together app, there are challenges. That's one of the very first app came with a Bluetooth only. The Bluetooth, as I said earlier, it cannot measure the distance. It can only measure the signal strength. And from that, we estimate the distance. However, the signal strength received varies from phone to a phone. It depends on what type of phone you have got. Some phones can talk louder. Some phones talk milder. Therefore, the received signal strength changes. That protocol thus requires to send what device is transmitting that. As you can see on the left, the device model is exposed. So that may become a security or privacy issue. As you can see there, they found that the signal strength varies by about 30 dB. That is about 1,000 times it varies. That's a lot. So the accuracy of the estimation of the distance become a question. SaveItCough app, that's the Australian app. Let's see quickly what data it collects and how it is processed. It is a centralized app, therefore we need to register with a name. It can be a pseudonym, age, range, postcode, phone number. And when people are in the proximity, it exchanges the encrypted reference code. That is the temporary ID. Different people, different countries use different terms for that. And it puts a date, time, and the received signal strength and the phone model, because so that we can calculate the estimate, we can estimate the distance. When someone is tested, he or she needs to upload the traces to the COVID Safe data store. That's the central store. Then they will do the matching, because in the centralized system, matching is done at the server, and they will contact the exposed users through, that's done by the state and territories, and they will alert the user. If you do a quick analysis of the COVID-Safe app, in my opinion, they have done a good job. Why? They introduced a timely app for the Australians. In that sense, it's a good app, but it has room for a lot of improvement. The other aspects of the app is it's an opt-in, and people can opt out anytime, even after opting in. And the personally identifiable information, minimal information is collected, only the phone number and the postcode. And anonymized IDs are encrypted and stored. So reasonably okay. And no location data is collected. That's an important point. Then fraudulent uploads to the server. An attacker can falsely upload data to the server as if he or she is infected. That can raise a lot of panic in the society. That's prevented by creating an authentication code one needs before uploading. And uploaded data is always done with the consent of the user. So you need to agree to that. The source code is released to public scrutiny. That's pretty good, but they did not release it before the app was released, but they released slightly later. The handshakes are kept in the phone only for 21 days. After that, it's automatically deleted. There are a few other issues with this COVID-Safe app. The phone model is exposed. People can see that may enable some kind of tracking. As I said earlier, that is needed for the estimation of the distance. The received signal strength highly dependent on the device as of now. This has an impact on the battery life, although it is not significant. There are some concerns about the potential interference of this app with some other apps which use the Bluetooth. One of the good things with the Australian app is that it came up with the strongest privacy legislation that was passed last week. It is very strong, and the data cannot be used for any other purposes and cannot be stored in overseas, and people cannot force anyone to use this app. And the penalty is also somewhat serious. What are the improvements COVID-Safe can make? As I said earlier, centralized, decentralized. The decentralized group thinks that the IDs generated by the central server may not be a good idea. It could be done in a distributed manner. And the matching may not be done by the same central server because they are going to get lots of information about the citizens' movements. Then the reliability of the app, in particular the iPhone, seems to be a question, although there are improvements made on that. The app was released and then 2 updates are also released. That's pretty good. Some of the bugs were fixed and then they released it. So almost every week they're getting a new version. Android, if you run this app on the Android, it asks for the location permission. Although the app doesn't use it, the Android asks for that. The battery power consumption may be minimized, and bugs obviously can be fixed before releasing it. The server side had been an issue, sensitive issue. They have not released the server side details yet, how the data is stored and how it is protected, what kind of encryption schemes are used, etc. are not released. And the tech community wants to get the handle on it so that they can correct the source code as well. Now, moving forward, as I said, Apple, Google got together, came up with an API so that it facilitates the governments around the world to come up with an easy app for contact tracing. That provides an API that can access easily their OS. That eliminates lots of trouble in developing the apps. This also broadens the potential adaptation by the citizens. It is easy to be baked into the OS. And they put lots of constraints onto that. No app can use their API if they're going to use the GPS data. Therefore, it cannot use GPS. App must meet certain privacy, security, and data control criteria. They put a sunset clause, that is, when the pandemic is over, they will remove it. If you look at the Google Apple API operation, that's based on the distributed, decentralized one, where you don't need to register with the central authority. The temporary IDs are generated within your phones, and if you are meeting somebody in a close proximity, the temporary IDs are exchanged. That's fine. And if one of them tested positive, they upload their temporary IDs to the server. And what happens? Everyone who is on this app regularly check with the server if there is download the infected temporary IDs and whether there's any match. That match is also done in the user's phone. So it eliminates the central server having lots of personal data. That's the decentralized app. This has been praised a lot, but now getting into some question mark. Before that, let's see one other property. The Google Apple came up with a personalized exposure risk assessment matrix. That is, how much was the risk that you were exposed? The phone, when it gives an alert, it gives you a number, the risk level as well, based on how close you were to the infected person and how long you were exposed to that. Is it 10 minutes or is it 20 minutes or is it 30 minutes? And what is the risk level of that person? That is, what was the infected status of that person? Was it in day 1 or is it day 12 or day 14? Then the weighting is changed. And another factor that is by the health authorities, depending on the severity of this disease, the conditions. And this weighted outcome is converted to a number 1 to 8. And that is given as the risk level for the exposed user. And this is for the primary exposed user. They have also come up with the risk level for a secondary exposed user. That is an infected user got exposed to a non-infected user, and a secondary person was exposed to the middleman. Then how to calculate that? They come up with a risk factor as well. That's pretty good. Now, the criticism coming in the last few days on this type of decentralized app is that the data is stored on individual phones. And what happens is that a pass-by, a drive-by person can scan some of these IDs, temporary IDs. And when the infected person ID is loaded onto the server, they can see who got infected, and they might be able to trace the people or pinpoint. So that has become a concern. So the problem here is simple. We would like to have 2 data sets. One is the exposed, that is on my phone, who are the exposed temporary IDs I have got, the collection. I don't want to reveal that to anybody. And then there's another place where the infected IDs are stored. The only thing we need to do is to find out whether there's an intersection between the 2 data sets. If there is an intersection, then the person is exposed to an infected person. If not, that's fine. The question, technical question is, can we do this without revealing any of the data points in the 2 circles that you have seen? One is the exposed IDs, the other one is the infected IDs. There are cryptographic mechanisms like private set intersection, which without revealing the actual data on both data set, it can reveal the size of the intersection. If the size is non-zero, we are exposed. That's a very pretty attractive technique people are working on as of now. Along those lines, system Epion was proposed a few days ago. There is a distributed center, but they introduced a matching mechanism that could be done in a different server rather than the same server. The infected people are checked by the healthcare providers. They believe the doctors, normally they keep the confidential information, and they encrypt the infected IDs and upload to the Epion server. And then the individual users check the matching through this mechanism I just explained without revealing the actual encounters they have. This looks promising, and there can be more coming in from the cryptographic community. Towards the end, I can say the road ahead for Australia, the Google Apple API seems to have some potential advantage and benefit of hybrid architecture, not just centralized or decentralized. Maybe there are benefits in both systems. We might be able to capture those. Then definitely we need to work on the advanced cryptographic techniques to enhance the security and the privacy aspects. It is important a customized architecture and settings needed for every country because the requirements are different. The exposure level is different. So every country needs to fine tune at least those parameters. The investment on this technology might help a lot even in future towards the disaster management. That comes to the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Muthu, for that presentation. I'm sure there was a lot of questions people have rummaging around in their heads. We'll just go through. Remember to use the thumbs up to for which questions you prefer to answer. But first off, we have an anonymous question. Do you have an update about the problems on this app on the iPhone? For example, not working when the phone is locked, draining power, and not working while other apps are running.
Okay, this question was raised in the recent Senate inquiry, and the DTA CEO was explaining that he acknowledged there were issues, and one of the latest versions released on last Thursday seems to have fixed some of them, but my understanding is not completely fixed, but this had been an issue. I can tell, say, countries around the world, for example, France, they contacted Apple to help them to develop this app without an issue. It seems they were not getting positive response, so they broke away from the Google Apple API, and France, UK, and Germany wanted to go separately. And Germany at the last minute decided, no, we'll go with a decentralized app. So they're going back to the Google Apple API. So the short answer coming back, there are still issues with that. And it is not, in my opinion, not 100% resolved. That's raised an important question as well. One of the issues with this app, it's great. The government has introduced this app in a timely manner, and it's unprecedented. About 6 million people downloaded. It is amazing. Even Singapore initially had only 17% of the people downloading the app. That's good. Still, the efficacy of the app, we don't know yet. That needs to be tested. No country has done a test on that, the effectiveness of the app. Am I answering the question, or I'm happy to clarify any further?
No, I think that was a good one. There's quite a few questions coming in now. Kelsey Nabin asks, what analysis of the data happens on the server side? Why has this code not been released?
Good question. The security privacy issue. They will be worrying whether the code is clean enough to be released, whether there are any obvious vulnerabilities. I'm just guessing obvious vulnerabilities that could be exploited. So they might be going through. It was done in a rush, so they might be having second thoughts to see what is going on. And what's the process? There's a lot of myths here. As I said, what we understand is that the common man understands is that it logs only the encounters if you come across another app which is within 1.5 meter and over 15 minutes exposure. As I said earlier, the Bluetooth doesn't measure the distance. It will be logging every beacon coming out, plus 15 minutes, even to time it, at least every minute there will be an advertisement and collecting the data. So there'll be an enormous amount of raw data collected. It might be that they put it through a filter, obviously, and say, okay, we are not going to worry about anything more than 1.5 meter and anything less than 15 meter exposure. That could be one of the aspects might be happening in the server, the filtering aspect of it. Thank you.
Okay, we do have quite a few questions flowing through. Another one from Kelsey is, and I'm not sure how you go with this one, but what are the potential consequences of global aggregation of digital contact tracing data?
It's a good question. It is the data that is collected through this is enormous. It has lots of personal information. So that's why the researchers, the academics are thinking loudly, can we come up with a better solution? Or is that the best solution? Of course, we need to help to solve this pandemic issue. And what's a compromise? It's always security and privacy is a balancing act. And is it the right balance for the given situation? The other issue is related to that is the mission creeping. Normally, states use this opportunity to introduce data collection mechanism. And will they use it for other purposes later? Is the question in the minds of the people. The question raised there, if I remember correctly, is that globally aggregating. One thing is that's why Australia has done a good thing. They put the legislation. The data cannot be used for any other purposes, not by any other agencies, and cannot be stored outside Australia. So that might give some comfort for us. Thank you.
Okay. Now, one of the benefits we have of being in Griffith University is we have a wide range of researchers from all different areas, and Muthu is certainly a cybersecurity expert, but have you noticed a few of the questions are leaking a little bit outside of Muthu's area of expertise? And I'm just going to call on someone who happens to be in our audience. Dr. Kieran Hardy is a lecturer from the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. His expert areas are social implications of using technology for public health, and his main areas of expertise is in counterterrorism law and policy. I'm going to throw the next question over to Kieran and see how he goes. It's a tricky one. Another anonymous question. The US's Patriot and Cloud Act applies to subsidiaries of USA corporations such as AWS. So even if data held in Australia servers, this appears irrelevant under those acts. as the subsidiary must comply with the US Act if data files are requested by a US agency. Has this been examined? Sorry, Kieran, to give you this one. You're muted, Kieran.
Thanks, Damien. No worries, and thank you, Muthu, for the great presentation. Yeah, so this is a tricky issue legally. A lot of issues that cross national boundaries are, as we know, having multinational corporations, whether that's trying to regulate social media companies for other purposes, raises a lot of difficulties. So under the Cloud Act and the Patriot Act, I think the government is trying to maintain that those requests can't be made. I think there's something of a consensus in the legal community that until Australia becomes a qualifying foreign government under the Cloud Act, then those agencies could request the data to be handed over, and that depends on whether a bill that's currently before Parliament, which is the International Production Orders Bill of 2020. If that's approved, then Australia will become a qualifying foreign government. That would enable Amazon to deny one of the requests from an agency. But my understanding is that until that bill goes through, one of those claims could be possible, as in could be enforced by the US agencies. So there are some other principles under US law that Amazon might be able to rely on, but I think that's all up in the air. And I imagine a request like that would go before a court. And given the quite uncertain legal position at the moment, I think that would need to be determined. But hopefully if this bill goes through, then Amazon could refuse to have the data transferred.
Thank you very much for that, Kieran. We still have a few coming in. Another one, which I think will go to Muthu. Are there concerns about having companies such as Apple and Google create a secure system when they are also in the business interest of selling people's information? Does that need to be weighed with their ability to develop this domestically?
It is a good question, and that concern has also been raised by a number of people. Apple, Google, they are competitors. They file case and get billions of dollars, try to get from each other. Why all of a sudden both CEOs got together and agree to come up with an app? Are they likely to have any backdoors there? Are they trying to, the data is the new oil, and people can, or tech companies are monetizing that. So what is the intention behind that? It's a good question, but then we need to see what the app is doing and what we can do. That goes back to the last part of my presentation. That's where the cryptography might come, and we minimize any personal data exposed wherever possible. Then we, as I said again, it's a risk evaluation, whether it's worth the risk in this case. So it's a balancing act coming back. Thank you, Damien.
Okay. I'm not sure how you'll go with this one, Muthu, but what phone, make and model did they run the test app on, and how long were they able to run it?
Okay, if I understand it correctly, what phone they use for the testing, if I'm correct, I'm sure they must be testing in a range of phones, the Android and the iOS, and different versions of that. However, for any of these apps to work, it should be one of the recent ones, in the sense probably post 2015, I suppose, the OS, because it uses the Bluetooth low energy. As long as it supports the Bluetooth low energy, it will work. And the question of how much the battery power it takes and how effectively, Android seems to be not having any issue with logging the handshake, but iPhone, definitely they have improved. They have found ways to get around most of the problems, but it is not 100% sure whether it's resolved. Thank you, Damien.
We only have time for a couple more. One from Sam O'Connor. I note last week all states and territories have signed up and been trained on the COVID Safe app. To your knowledge, has the app been used for contact tracing?
Yes, thank you for that question, Sam. The app, yes, the health authorities have started, I think, end of or middle of last week. They were allowed to use the data, so they have started getting the data, and they must be testing it now because there's a lot of parameter to be tested from the signal strength. So they need to get the parameter right to see are we, because they don't want to. The issues here are, as I said, it's simple. Two data sets, the infected and the exposed. But the intersection is the difficult part. The health authorities don't want to give a call or inform somebody who is not really exposed. At the same time, they do not want to miss somebody who is really exposed. How do they get this balance? There should be lots of tests done, and Singapore has released some data about this, the power levels with different phones, how it works. Okay, on that note, if I can expand, the Google Apple API, they agreed to find some solution for this power level issue as well. In their API, the phone, when they transmit, it has to inform what's the transmission power it is using. So that will be available to the receiver as well. And that helps significantly in estimating the distance accurately. So coming back, Sam, in short, yes, the state and territory health authorities have access to the data at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, we have one last question, but it's a doozy, so we'll go with that one. This will be our last question, and it's a two-parter. Just wondering, without proper authorization, whether any app can sniff any personalized information, and why this is a big deal for privacy from your expert opinion. Why are we bothering so much? Because in every day we use so many other apps without raising privacy issues. For example, my bank app. How can this app and bank app raise concerns around privacy?
Very good question. Thank you, Damien. There are two parts, if I remember correctly. One is about the sorry, Damien. The first part was I'll write it down.
On whether the app can sniff out other personal information.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Definitely, yes. An attacker can just drive with an antenna and can capture the temporary IDs. It is definitely possible. It happens in every communication, radio communication, whether it's a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, it can happen. That's where the more you know about security, you may feel threatened, but that's a reality. It is a fine balancing act. Usability. Do I want it? Am I happy to take this risk? So it is possible. However, it is illegal to collect data like that. And in particular, from this particular app, it is illegal. The second part is, why bother about privacy? Probably you are correct. For most of the people, this is nothing, because our personal information is up there anyway. So why we bother? That's most of the people. But there are people who individual situation creates some danger about exposing the personal information. So they need to be concerned. So that's why we say it's an individual choice. Would you like to take this risk? There's a risk. What is the level? Is it too much? Too little for me? Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, oh, hold on. I've just got to find where everything is. Okay, Okay, Muthu, thank you very much for your presentation and your time and your thought in this matter. I'd also like to thank Dr. Kieran Hardy, who was able to join us to add some different insights into this conversation. We'd also like to just point out, during this COVID time, as you realise, universities have been moving to provide micro-credentials or short courses for people to upgrade their skills. And so we have the graduate certificates in cybersecurity and data analytics available fully online, and these can be undertaken as full-time study, 2 courses at a time in 6-week blocks, and will be completed. You can complete them by October 2020. And if you want to get into those and find out a bit more information, please go to the website griffith.edu.au and you can find out more about that. Thank you, Kieran and Muthu. I'd also like to point out we do run quite a few of these during these new self-isolation and COVID times. We have been moving our impact lectures onto a digital format, and we've run quite a few of them. You can go have a look at them at the Impact site. In a few weeks' time, we'll be having our next event, Life After Lockdown, New Opportunities and Challenges for Cities. This will be presented by Professor Paul Burton from our Cities Research Institute. It'll be a panel discussion, the first time we've undertaken a panel discussion. So we'll bring in community members and council members from across the Gold Coast to talk about how we can open a city up after lockdown. If you did miss any of today's presentation, if you came in a little late, or if you'd like to revise any of the information that Muthu went through, I do understand he went through a lot of details, so you might want to check those out again. We will be putting the recorded version of this up at our Impact site, and that can be found at impact.griffith.edu.au. So that's impact.griffith.edu.au. Muthu's presentation and the Q&A will be posted there shortly, and you can share it with colleagues and family. Also, you can catch up on some of the other presentations we've had, as well as lots of more research stories from around the Griffith Sciences team. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your questions. They were very thoughtful. And lastly, a big thank you to Muthu for his time in putting this all together. It's been great to have you here, Muthu.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all from us now. We will be signing out and see you at our next event.